Thank you for tuning in to the premiere of BuffaLearn, a new online educational series powered by DYOUVILLE. To kick off today's presentation, Ethan Cox, co-owner of Community Beer Works and instructor of the BuffaLearn course, The History of Buffalo Brewing, is here to share a recipe for a beer cocktail they cooked up over at CBW. Please enjoy the show.
Hi, it's Ethan from Community Beer Works, and today I'm going to show you a real simple beer cocktail that we came up with here at Community Beer Works. We love beer, so even when we think about cocktails, sometimes we think about how can we put beer in them and make them better. This is a Frank-based cocktail. Frank is our pale ale. So simple ingredients: we have rum, we have orange curacao, Frank, and creme de violet. And this is a Violet Frank. It was made up by our general manager, Joe. So, super simple. I'm going to do, hold on. Get some ice. Okay, do 1.5 ounces of rum. Do 1 ounce. Maybe a little shy, curacao. Give that a stir. And pour that out. Top that off with Frank. And a dash, and by a dash I mean not much, of the violet. If it turns like purple, you overdid it. It's very sweet. And there you go. You take Frank and make it into a lovely beverage. Floral notes, you get a little bit of that rum character in there, lots of citrus from the curacao, just delightful. Thanks. Thumbs up.
We ask that you be quiet and courteous to others, and silence your cell phones now. For the longest time, much of the country looked down on Buffalo. And yes, we've gone through some tough times. But recently, what others have come to discover, what we have always known, is that if you looked just a little closer, Buffalo has a lot to offer. And we're going to make sure that everyone knows about it.
feeling of 5 minutes before the curtain goes up on opening night. There's excitement, anticipation, stage fright, extreme stage fright sometimes.
We started doing beekeeping because we were reading about the plight of the honeybee. So we decided that we wanted to at least do beekeeping, and then we took it a few steps further.
I'm the co-author of Buffalo Beer, A History of Brewing in the Nickel City. Enjoy really thinking and talking a lot about Buffalo's brewing history. It's a great story.
I got interested in the theater when my mother was at a community theater in Boonville, New York. Yes, that's right, Boonville, New York. I am from the boonies.
I've lived here my entire life. I am here with my daughter Erin and my son Dan, who both work with me at the Garden Center.
This is my home. These are my roots. Even when I lived away from here, Buffalo was just never really all that far away.
I'm Mike Masterson, owner and operator of Masterson's Garden Center in East Aurora.
Hello, I'm Ethan Cox. I am the co-founder and the co-owner of Community Beer Works in Buffalo, New York.
My name's Lorraine O'Donnell, and I'm the Executive Artistic Director of the Cavadoki Theater.
Welcome to BuffaLearn, powered by DYOUVILLE. BuffaLearn is an online educational platform offering courses taught by local experts, showcasing our region's vibrant community and culture. DYOUVILLE brings 100 years of educational experience from a West Side institution to the series. The first few installments range from beer, to theater, to bees, addressing important and topical information in a fun and interesting way. And this is just a start. We'd love to know more about what you want to learn next. Let's keep Buffalo a secret no more.
It's controlled chaos. How does that? Does that sound right? You try to make everything as streamlined as you can. You try to be as organizational as you can so everything works out perfectly. But at the same time, sometimes life happens and you have to readjust on a dime.
I'm not sure that everybody realizes the amount of work that happens before the actual rehearsal process with the actors begins.
It's the excitement that what you've worked on for sometimes a year or 2 years is finally coming to life.
The theater is important because it's people emoting in front of you and it's live and you feel involved in it.
I think that theater paints a world that could be.
It reminds us what it means to be human beings. It helps us to better understand folks who are different from us.
People are always surprised to know that it takes a year, sometimes 2 years, to produce a play that is only playing for 4 weeks. That's why I'm thrilled that you're watching this right now, because we're going to show you that and we're going to explain to you why that is and what goes into this. My name's Lorraine O'Donnell, and I'm the Executive Artistic Director of the Cavadoki Theater.
If you're thinking about beekeeping, you've likely heard that there's something bad going on with the bees.
Beekeeping is important because virtually our lives depend on what bees do.
We lose about 40% of managed colonies every year.
So some of the issues facing honeybees nowadays are monoculture, pesticide use, poor diet, and just commercial beekeeping.
Without bees, we would be missing a lot of the foods that are very staple to us. So the fruits and vegetables that we eat every day are very dependent on pollinators.
Are the bees really dying? And the answer is yes.
Mike Masterson, owner and operator of Masterson's Garden Center in East Aurora. My daughter Erin and my son Dan. During this course, what we'd like to do is help you to decide whether beekeeping is for you or not, and even if it's not, teach you what you can do to help bees even without being a beekeeper.
As a beekeeper, a backyard beekeeper, you have a unique ability to be able to help that by putting a couple of healthy colonies back out into the world.
So we will start out with just basic bee anatomy, teach you about the honeybee, its life cycles, everything you need to know from A to Z, which is why we call it Beekeeping 101. We hope that at least some of you will continue on to become beekeepers. Anything that you can do to help the plight of the honeybee helps all of us. Thanks very much.
Thank you for watching this premiere of the BuffaLearn online learning series, powered by DYOUVILLE. We hope you'll head over to BuffaLearn.com and check out all the courses available now, and those soon to come. Now please enjoy a snippet of our first installment, The History of Buffalo Brewing.
When we talk about the history of Buffalo brewing, we are also talking about the growth of the city kind of more generally, and we're talking about patterns of immigration. Interesting stories about the people and personalities involved, the history and growth of industrialization, that technological and scientific advancement that fueled that. It's an interesting sweep of history. It touches on a lot of other points about history, and it really touches a lot on Buffalo's unique path of growth and, of course, decline that we saw of industrialization here as well as in the Rust Belt more generally. And then, of course, the rebirth of craft beer. It's a great story, and I look forward to sharing a lot of the particular stories within it over the course of the series. Hello, I'm Ethan Cox. I am the co-founder and the co-owner of Community Beer Works in Buffalo, New York. And as well, I'm the co-author of Buffalo Beer, A History of Brewing in the Nickel City, a book that I published with Mike Rizzo in 2015, detailing all of the history of Buffalo brewing all the way up to about 2015, or as close to it as we could. So there's a lot of things that have changed since then, but I've kept up with that and enjoy really thinking and talking a lot about Buffalo's brewing history. It's a great story. So I'm essentially a Buffalo native. My family moved here when I was 4 in the very late 70s. And I grew up here, went to school and high school here, went away to Boston for college. So came back in 2006 and have enjoyed living back here and raising a family here ever since. This is my home. These are my roots. Even when I lived away from here, I was coming back 2 or 3 times a year. So for me, Buffalo was just never really all that far away. And as far away as I ever lived from it, I was always coming back. So it's home. My parents still live here, although my sisters don't. But I love Buffalo. And when I started thinking about, that time in your life when you've gotten married and you're ready to have some kids, it seemed very obvious to me that Buffalo is the place to come back to. So I left a career in academics, more or less. When I came back, I worked for a little while, ironically, at DYOUVILLE, but my ultimate destiny was to get involved with beer. I'd been a home brewer since I was in college. It was a great way to get into beer before you were 21, basically, because it's not illegal to buy a homebrew kit at the age of 18. So off I went down that rabbit hole as well, homebrewing for many, many years. And when I got back to Buffalo, I took that hobby really to the next level, becoming a certified beer judge and becoming involved in homebrewing competitions. So that sort of level of homebrewing expertise. And as well, I was briefly the president of one of our local homebrewing clubs. So very involved with, quite early on, education and beer and brewing. And all of that came together in about 2010 when me and a bunch of friends decided, hey, it seems like we're all really into beer and Buffalo could use some more breweries. At that time, the only breweries that were really operating were Flying Bison up on Ontario Street in Black Rock and Pearl Street. But Pearl Street is not a packaging brewery, but they're downtown making beer. So we saw that there was beer exploding all over the country, that most cities the size of Buffalo had 2, 3, 4 small breweries by that time. And we thought we'd throw our hat in the ring. So by 2012, we'd figured out exactly how to do that. There's a lot of licensing. There's a lot of figuring out where you're going to be, getting the services, getting the build out, and then, of course, getting your brewing system together, which is expensive. And we started brewing beer in 2012. Community Beer Works has persisted since then. 2 years ago, we started a big expansion project, which we completed, and we're sitting in today, about a mile from our original location on the west side of Buffalo. In fact, this location has historic significance and ties into Buffalo's brewing history, and that's one of the reasons I love it so much. We are attached to what was called the Schaefer Brothers, so not Schaefer, the big national brewery, but Schaefer Brothers. They were 2 guys, and they were much smaller, but the Schaefer Brothers Malting Company was established on this site in 1888, and we occupy some buildings that were attached to that malt house later when it was operating as a chocolate factory. Prohibition put the Schaefer Brothers out of business, like so many breweries and malt houses in Buffalo and across the country. In this series, we're going to talk a lot about Buffalo brewing history, obviously through the ages, but I want to talk about it through some specific lenses too. The history of Buffalo brewing is the history of other things. So when we talk about the history of Buffalo brewing, we are also talking about the growth of the city kind of more generally. And we're talking about patterns of immigration. First, brewers here were mostly English-style brewers, but then as was the case throughout the United States, Germans started immigrating and bringing their brewing techniques, which eventually became far more dominant. When we talk about brewing history, we're also talking about the history and growth of industrialization. Early breweries were a lot like Community Beer Works' first brewery. It was really elaborated home brewing with almost all the beer served on site and no packaging or bottling at all. But over the course of years, as technology evolved, these breweries became scaled up and ever more elaborate and ever more complicated and needing more and more capital and, of course, making more and more beer to the point where in the early 1900s, almost 1 million barrels of beer per year were brewed right here in Buffalo. Way less than is brewed today, for sure. When we talk about the history of beer and brewing in Buffalo, we're also talking about that technological and scientific advancement that fueled that. So things like instrumentation, but also things like steam power and then eventually electrical power. So there are a lot of also interesting stories about the people and personalities involved because, again, when you talk about the history here, a lot of times these brewers, they were hooked into pretty big, important networks, ethnic networks. And so they were also very friendly with the bankers and the politicians and in some cases the cops. And so there's some interesting stories. And when you look at these guys' graves, they're fairly large. They did well for themselves. They were interesting personalities at the time, especially before Prohibition. The history of Buffalo brewing also after Prohibition is reflective of the history of brewing in this country at large. At first, a lot of large breweries reopened, but then consolidation happened, and consolidation happened across a lot of other industries. It wasn't just brewing. And so by the 1970s, late 1960s, and in Buffalo, as in so many places, there wasn't really much thriving local brewing at all. National companies had really taken over, and eventually global companies, such that by the late 80s, there was really pretty much no brewing in Buffalo. And it wasn't until the 2000s that there was a rebirth of brewing in Buffalo, for the most part, with the establishment of Flying Bison. So it's an interesting sweep of history. It touches on a lot of other points about history, and it really touches a lot on Buffalo's unique path of growth and, of course, the decline that we saw of industrialization here as well as in the Rust Belt more generally, and then, of course, the rebirth of craft beer. It's a great story, and I look forward to sharing a lot of the particular stories within it over the course of the series.
Thanks again for spending time with us today. Please check out BuffaLearn.com to see all of the courses BuffaLearn has to offer. From all of us at DYOUVILLE, stay safe and enjoy your weekend.